Hi guys, it's been over a month since the Oscars, and of course Brazil took the Best International Feature Film category for the film I'm Still Here. It was quite a roller coaster for the awards campaign in general, with the favourite with the most nominations, including for Best International Feature Film, was Emilia Perez for France. However, due to the divisive nature of the film, plus some really toxic tweets from the lead actress, Carla Sofia Garçon, the campaign plummeted, resulting in the film only getting 2 awards from the 13 nominations it got. The awards it did win were Best Supporting Actress and Best Song, and it failed to pick up Best International Feature Film, having been the firm favourite since France selected the film as their submission. This would have been France's first win in the Best International Feature Film category since 1992's Indochine, which is quite strange for such a powerhouse of world cinema that is France. France even changed their selection process to try and get the film that is strategically most likely to win the awards. And to be fair, Emilia Perez was the firm favourite at the time they made their selection, so strategically it made sense that they selected that film, and they weren't to know what a backlash and a toxic discovery of tweets that would happen afterwards. Despite the film winning 2 awards and Brazil winning the International Feature Award, there was also an award for Latvia's entry, Flow, which won Best Animation, and they also were nominated for the Best International Feature Film category. So overall, we can say it was an excellent night for international films, and to have 4 of the statues going to nominations for the Best International Feature Film category is a remarkable achievement in itself, and says a lot about how film is global at the moment. However, we also are entering the new cycle of award categories, with the Cannes Film Festival starting next month. So it's about time we look at which countries have the most momentum and the most success in the category, whether that's in the last 10 years or whether it's over of all time in the Oscars. It's interesting to see because award voters will have a list of 90 plus films from across the world. They are going to choose the big titles, but they are also going to choose films from countries that regularly are successful at the Oscars and produce the sort of films that Oscar voters will watch and want to see. So in this video, I'm first going to look at the last 10 years. Which countries have been the most successful at the Oscars in that time period? Which countries are on the up? And which countries are losing momentum? Because this all plays into the films which are prioritised by Oscar voters in that long list. I will also then be looking at the number of Oscar wins in the Best International Feature Film category and see which countries are at the top and where does the recent winner Brazil sit. And finally, using a specific point system, I will determine which country is the most successful at the Oscars of all time, which countries are on the rise and which countries are falling. So let's roll and find out which country is the most successful at the Best International Feature Film Oscar. So if you're new to my channel, my name is Paul, and I review the best of world cinema, and I follow the race for Best International Feature Film, from countries submitting their films to the final winner. In the first part of this video, I'm going to look at which countries over the last 10 years have the most success and momentum in the Best International Feature Film Oscar. I will do this by adopting a point system, giving 4 points if you have won the award, 3 points if you have been nominated only, 2 points if your film has made just the shortlist, and 1 point if you have submitted a film but it was not shortlisted. I will use this scoring system over the last 10 years, meaning if you go back to 2014, where Ida for Poland won, those points no longer counts in this ranking system. And it will give us an opportunity to see which countries have the most success and which countries are losing out at the Oscars, and identifying those countries which are at risk of dropping down the table because their success was in 2015, which next year will drop further down the table. I have included a point for those who have submitted films that have not progressed in the category, in part to recognise that there is a difference between a country that continuously submits films with a country that may only ever submit one film, but it manages to get to the nomination phase, for example. And being able to distinguish between the two is really helpful in this exercise. And just a reminder, the point of this is to understand which countries Oscar voters are most likely to look out for, even if they haven't put forward a big title in the early award season. So first, let's have a look at the top 10 countries based in the last 10 years of the Best International Feature Film Academy Awards. Germany and Denmark are tied on the same number of points, but I have put Germany first because their most recent win was for All Quiet on the Western Front, which was more recent compared to Denmark's Another Round. Both countries have secured at least a shortlisting in 8 out of the last 10 years, with both countries obviously winning the award in that time period. And this year, both countries received a nomination: The Seed of the Sacred Fig for Germany and The Girl with the Needle for Denmark. And if we look at year 10, which is going to drop off next year, Denmark received a nomination for A War, and Germany received a shortlisting for Labyrinth of Lives. So therefore, Denmark has to perform better than Germany to keep in touch with the same points in this system. And in bronze medal position are France, who are still 5 points behind Denmark, but have risen in the table by part because of Emilia Perez getting a nomination. Their film in year 10, which will drop off next year, was the Oscar-nominated Mustang, a brilliant film, actually in the Turkish language, which is great to see. However, if they don't match that, they're going to lose points in this table system. So this year, they need to be able to get a nomination at the next award ceremony. Within the top 10, the biggest faller has been Poland, who has fallen down 3 places to 6th. And this is in part because the film that dropped off after year 10 was the award-winning Ida. Therefore, they have lost points because this year's submission, Under the Volcano, did not make the shortlist. Therefore, they've lost 3 points and their position has fallen down the table. However, after Ida's success, they went 3 years without getting onto the shortlist at least. So they're not going to lose further points unless they choose not to submit a film. It's extremely unlikely. Surprisingly, Hungary move up the table despite having their film at the last Oscars not making the shortlist. And this is in part about other countries losing points rather than them gaining points. It is also worth noting that the year 10 winner, which will drop off next year, was Son of Saul by Hungary. So they are worried about losing points. And so you can see them declining in terms of their momentum. And they haven't actually been on that shortlist since 2019. So they really need to pull something out the bag to be able to stay solid in that top 10. And whether they're able to do so, because I imagine there's some restrictions on artistic creativity in Hungary at the moment under the Orban regime, we will wait and see. However, Hungary are prone to produce beautiful cinema, and we really hope they can submit something at the next Oscars to really cherish that Hungarian legacy. Another big climber within the top 10 is Italy, who surprisingly still are only in 8th place. This is in part because their last Oscar win for The Great Beauty dropped off a couple of years ago, and they went 6 years without getting to at least the shortlisting phase. However, their more recent form within the last 4 years, they've had 2 nominations and a shortlisting. So these are for The Hand of God, Io Capitano, and last year's shortlisted film, The Meleagle. While Italy may only be in 8th place in the rankings, the fact they've had this success in the last 4 years, showing they're really developing that momentum. So it's really exciting to see what film Italy submits at the next Oscars. Norway also climb into the top 10 thanks because of their shortlisted Armand. However, they're not quite challenging beyond that yet, and they will really need to get another nomination after The Worst Person in the World, just because if they want to be a solid top 10 country, they need to be consistent. So we've had a look at the top 10. So let's have a look at the biggest climbers. Now, there's a big caveat with this formula. Those lower down the table will have the biggest rise because 1 point can push you up 20, 30 places, compared to a point increase in the top 10 may only keep you at the same place. So here are the top 5 biggest climbers in the last 10 years for the Best International Feature Film Oscar. Ukraine and Armenia have only climbed up because their year 11 film that dropped off was due to the fact they did not submit a film. So therefore, just by submitting, they gained a point, which pushed them up the table. However, based upon those countries that were successful at the last Oscars, Latvia have moved up 30 places to a respectable 23rd in the rankings. And it will be interesting to see whether do they go back to previous style Latvian cinema and submit film that are fine but don't necessarily get Oscar attention, or will Flow be able to develop some momentum and really develop Latvian cinema? I really hope in the longer term there's some great films coming out of Latvia. However, I imagine the first next year or two, it will be quite difficult to get a film that gets to at least the shortlisting phase just because of the standard of cinema pre-flow that was coming out of Latvia. Another big climber is Brazil, who move up 28 places to 17th, and this is because of their win for I'm Still Here. Now, Brazil have a long history of brilliant cinema, Central Station, City of God, and all those sort of films. However, in the more recent years, they have not had success at the Oscars, and I don't think their submissions have been their best. However, with I'm Still Here having loads of success, I hope this is momentum in the Brazilian film industry, and I can imagine them increasingly selecting brilliant titles that do great and regularly see them on the shortlist and maybe occasionally get the odd nomination. I don't see Brazil, regardless of what they enter, winning next year. That's very unlikely. However, it depends on what impact I'm Still Here has on the Brazilian film industry. And hopefully there's some new and exciting titles coming through. And then finally, we have Thailand, who have moved up to 35th in the rankings, a great 28 place climb. And this is in part due to their first ever shortlisted film, How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies. And now Thailand have a long history of brilliant cinema, so I would expect this adds some motivation for them to select the right film and something that will get Oscar voters really excited. So now let's have a look about the biggest fallers in this ranking system. 3 out of the 5 biggest fallers are North Macedonia, Australia and Luxembourg, who have all suffered by not submitting a film in the last round of the Oscars, which have caused them to lose points, which have fallen down the table. I would also say that North Macedonia's and Australia's previous success at the Oscars is getting towards that endpoint where eventually they could lose more points. So both these countries really need to put something out of the bag and submit a film that could be in contention for at least a nomination. Venezuela has also fallen down 23 places because The Liberator, which was shortlisted, has fallen off the 10-year span. And perhaps the most interesting of this list is Russia, which has not submitted the last 3 years, and their Year 11 film, which has dropped off the scoring system, was nominated for the brilliant Leviathan. And it's to see whether the change in the White House will change the perspective of Russia submitting films. They refused to do so since 2021 because of sanctions against them. However, will this change? Will Russia start submitting films? And what films will Russia submit if they do submit films? Will it be that critical art house, or will it be state propaganda? Now, in my mind, it's more likely to be state propaganda, which will not do well at the Oscars. So now let's move on to how it looks like based upon number of wins at the Oscars of all time. Now, Brazil won their very first Oscar for I'm Still Here, which makes them one of 14 countries, which are listed here, who have won one Oscar in the Best International Feature Film category. And as I said in the introduction, France have gone from firm favourite this year to the most disastrous Oscar campaign of all time, which saw them lose the International Feature Film category. Had Emilia Perez won the category, they would have closed the gap from frontrunners Italy, who are 2 wins ahead of France. From the other nominations, Denmark missed the opportunity to move up to equal third, and Germany could have been in that top 5 had they won for The Seed of the Sacred Fig. So now, the third part of this video, we are going to look at countries based upon their all-time record, including how they've performed based upon wins, nominations and shortlistings. I have not included number of submissions that have had no success, because then you've got countries with loads and loads of points who've never been shortlisted compared to a country who might have actually won the Oscars, which slightly is a bit of an imbalance. So here we're recognising success rather than consistency. So let's take, for example, Ivory Coast. They've had 3 submissions at the Oscars of all time, 1 win and 1 shortlisting. And if you compare that to Belgium, who've never won, they've had 8 nominations and 2 shortlistings. So in my point system, Belgium are much higher because they have more consistent success. So let's have a look at which countries are the most successful at the Oscars of all time. So here's the top 10 countries of all time. And as you can see, France are dominating this because they've had a significantly more number of films that have made the nomination phase compared to Italy, with an additional 11 nominations compared to Italy. With Emilia Perez getting a nomination and the Italian submission Vermiglio not getting a nomination but only making the shortlisting phase, France have actually slightly opened the gap from the second place to Italy. Other nominated films from Denmark, The Girl with the Needle, and Germany, The Seed of the Sacred Fig, has seen them cement the places in 6th and 7th. And if we look at the other nominated and shortlisted films at the last Oscars, Brazil move up 6 places to 22nd place because of their win. And if they can keep that momentum, they should be within the top 20 countries of all time, pushing for a top 10 place. Latvia's first ever nomination see them enter the chart at 56th. And of course, this is because we're only taking into account films that have made at least the shortlisting phase. And from countries that featured on this year's shortlisted list, Canada move up to 14th because of universal language. They've won the award before, and they are one of the big contenders. They just haven't had much success in the last 10 years. Norway climbed to 19th, which is partly after the success of The Worst Girl in the World getting a nomination. They are one of the top 20 countries of all time at the Oscars. Iceland also rise to 35th, which again is because of their shortlisting, and they have had a nomination before and went through a period a couple of years ago of regularly being on that shortlist. Palestine move up a whopping 5 places to 35th because of their documentary On Ground Zero, which obviously got a lot of votes because of the importance of the film. And it's reflecting their position of their first film for a number of years to make that shortlist. Ireland continues some momentum from their nomination a couple of years ago for The Quiet Girl by Kneecap getting on the shortlist, which moves Ireland up to 43rd place. And we're going to now look at some of the biggest climbers on the list. And again, this is because those at the bottom of the rankings table who only have 1, 2, or 3 points, when they get another shortlisting, i.e. 1 more point, they tend to move up the list a lot higher than if you're regularly getting nominations or in the top 10, 15. You're not going to move much because you've got a nomination. And then finally, Thailand enter the rankings at 71st for their very first shortlisting film. Now, let's have a look at the biggest climber in the ranking system, and that would be Senegal's Dahomey. This is, in fact, the third film from Senegal to make the shortlist, and therefore they've moved quite significantly up the charts to 52nd place. What this attempts to show is which countries are best at playing the Oscars game, which countries are constantly submitting quality titles that get noticed by Oscar voters and make that final 15 shortlist. If you're a country that regularly submits and you're rarely consistently making the shortlist, getting nominated, and occasionally winning the awards, you've got that momentum. So when you're an Oscar voter with 90 countries' films to watch, and you're not going to get them through all of them, you're going to go for the big winners at Cannes, those with big receptions, but also you're going to go for those countries that are regularly featured in the Oscar race. So we are now going into the Cannes Film Festival season and see what are the early contenders for Best International Feature Film at the 98th Academy Awards. Which country is going to submit the right films? Which are going to be the main contenders? And are these from countries who have had past successes? If you want to follow the race for Best International Feature Film Academy Award or find out reviews of individual films, please do subscribe to my channel, like my videos, and share them widely. Thank you very much for watching.